Chapter 7. He loved me. He loves me not. Jacob sat, enjoying the cool evening breeze with Rachel. She was distant, and he knew why. Leah was in labor. He glanced at Rachel's troubled face, wishing she had conceived instead of Leah. But he was not God. How he loved her. She seemed to grow more beautiful each day, but the years of infertility had dampened her previously high spirit. The sound of feet rushing towards them distracted him from his thoughts. It was Leah's maid, Zilpah.
"My lord, your wife is delivered of a baby boy,"
she said, panting.
"Yahweh be praised!
Jacob jolted to his feet.
I have a son!"
He turned to Rachel and noticed her rigid countenance.
"You have a nephew!"
he said, unable to hide his delight.
"You must go on without me."
Rachel carried on with the fabric she was weaving.
"I am not feeling very well."
Jacob dismissed Zilpah, who looked all too grateful to leave the tense atmosphere. He put a hand on Rachel's shoulder and spoke in a less excited tone.
"But Leah will be expecting us."
Rachel jolted up, abandoning the fabric to fall to the ground.
"You now have a son from the woman my father gave you as my competition. Must I also prostrate myself before her for bearing you an heir?"
She let out a soft cry as she hurried into her tent. Jacob stood alone and confused. He was torn between his love for Rachel and his eagerness to see his newborn son. He swore in frustration, contemplating what he was to do. He could now hear Rachel's sobs getting louder, and it tore his heart. He could also hear the sound of rejoicing and the gentle cry of his newborn. He swore again at his dilemma. From all indications, his son was well. Rachel was not. Jacob headed inside for Rachel. The Lord sought to comfort Leah. He saw her suffering. She knew it. She just bore Jacob a son and named him Reuben. From the moment she became aware of her pregnancy, Leah felt a surge of hope. Now her husband would love her. The days looked even brighter as the months went by with no news of Rachel conceiving. Jacob would not ignore his first son, his only child. Reuben would be her access to his heart. But where was Jacob? Didn't he get the news?
"Zilpah, where is my husband?" "I delivered your message, my lady."
Leah waited patiently. Perhaps he was leaving orders for a feast. The hours passed, and Jacob didn't show up until the following morning, a gloomy Rachel behind him. Word had traveled around the camp that Jacob spent the entire evening of his son's delivery in Rachel's tent.
"My apologies, Leah. Your sister has been ill,"
he said without looking at her. Jacob entered the tent and went straight to where his son lay in Zilpah's arms. Leaning down, he fiddled with the boy's hand and spoke to him. Wasn't he going to carry his son? Rachel remained at the entrance, staring at the scene like it was a nightmare. She did look ill. She was suffering from chronic jealousy, made to burn and consume her. Jacob endured each day he spent working for Laban. The man and his sons put a heavy burden on him and took measures to ensure he didn't escape with his family before the agreed years were up. After an exhausting day at the ranch, he headed straight for Leah's tent. His feelings towards his first wife hadn't changed, but only 18 months after Reuben's delivery, she had given him a second son. Leah insisted it was now too burdensome to visit Rachel's tent with her nursing baby and made sure Zilpah kept Reuben away. With her newborn cuddled in her arms, Leah was sitting outside her tent. He made a mental note to keep his visit as brief as possible. He was grateful to Yahweh for adding to his house, but now he had to endure watching his beloved Rachel drown in misery. Leah rose as he approached, a triumphant grin on her face. But before he could render his half-hearted response to her reception, Rachel showed up behind him, panting and looking desolate.
Oh, Jacob! I cannot bear it anymore!
She clung to his arm and wept.
I do all the work around here. All she does is nurse and play around with a son grown enough to be out in the field.
You are a married woman now.
Leah glared at Rachel with disdain.
You could learn to do things women do without throwing a tantrum. Besides, the baby cannot nurse himself.
Then send your maid to help out with the work.
Rachel cried.
Yes, that sounds reasonable.
Jacob said, coming to her defense.
Where is Zilpah?
Zilpah is seen to your son, Jacob, and Rachel is well aware of it.
I have been reduced to less than a maid because I am childless.
Rachel cried, blinking her teary eyes at him. Leah rolled her own eyes at the dramatic display, and Jacob grunted in frustration. He would put an end to this.
Zilpah!
He had no patience for another feud between his wives. Zilpah dashed out of the tent with little Reuben tagging along.
Go with Rachel and help with the work. I will see to Reuben.
The girl looked at her mistress, uncertain. Jacob scowled, daring Leah to counter his order.
Yes, Zilpah, go.
Leah waved a hand of dismissal. A notorious beam shone through her eyes.
Jacob is back from the fields. I'm sure he would love to spend quality time with his sons.
Rachel's cheeks flushed red, but at a loss for further argument, she stomped away, with Zilpah following behind her. His mood lightened when his firstborn fell on his bottom and giggled at him. The boy gathered some sand in his palms as he made his way up and rushed to throw it at his mother.
No, Reuben!
Leah chided as the baby wailed. Jacob hurried to take Reuben, but he shrieked in protest and clung to his mother defiantly. He brushed Leah's leg as he forcefully drew the child away.
I apologize,
He said quickly.
You mustn't apologize for touching me, Jacob. I'm your wife.
A shy smile lined her face. Jacob eyed her with disdain.
Not by my will.
His reply came cold and resentful.
For how long, Jacob? How long must I endure your hatred? Will you ever forgive me?
Proceeding to march Reuben round the tent, Jacob's chest pounded with fury. How dare she? The little witch was as cunning as her father. What kind of sister would be so heartless to do what she did? Now she demands forgiveness. Annoyed as he was, the pained look on Leah's face stabbed his conscience. His emotions churned as his own hunger for his brother's forgiveness roused. He had considered his elder brother to be undeserving of his birthright and connived with their mother to replace him. Now he had to endure life as a castaway from his family. What kind of brother was he? The woman deserved some credit. As deceptive as she was, she had embraced and worshipped Yahweh as he had. Like Esau, Rachel had been full of doubts from the beginning, and when her older sister conceived, she became all the more rebellious.
You pleaded with him on my behalf, but he didn't answer you. If Yahweh exists, he wants nothing to do with me.
Rachel had declared defiantly. Jacob stared at Leah as she rocked Simeon and saw a painful reflection of his life. They both needed mercy, and despite their wrongs, Yahweh had blessed them in hostile households. Leah was struck once more by Jacob's hurtful words. She held Simeon close as a lump grew in her throat. She couldn't blame him. It was her fault he was stuck with a man he detested and married to two women who hated themselves. He would never love her. She could feel his gaze burrowing into her back as he returned from encircling the tent. Did he have more rage to throw at her? "I love you," she jolted as the words dragged her out of the pit of despair.
What did you say?
She stammered, turning to Jacob, a hand on her pounding chest. Jacob looked confused.
I said nothing,
he replied and put Reuben down again. Eyes widened, Leah shook her head and took a deep breath. What was wrong with her?
I am sorry, Jacob,
she said, struggling to control her emotions.
I may not deserve your love, but I have given you two sons for their sakes. Do I not at least deserve your forgiveness?
Jacob stood, staring at his first son as he played in the sand again. After what seemed like a lifetime of deafening silence, he let out a heavy sigh.
It wasn't entirely your fault. I forgive you,
he said without looking at her. Leah blinked her teary eyes in amazement. They were the kindest words he had said to her since their marriage.
Thank you.
She lifted her eyes to see Zilpah making her way back. She hadn't stayed long enough to be of any real help to Rachel, but Leah was not surprised. She knew, despite her childish display, Rachel would rather work hours like a slave than allow Jacob spend time with her or her sons. Besides, she had a maid of her own who did most of the work. She watched Jacob take his leave and tried to imagine those words on his lips. "I love you," spoken directly to her heart. If only. Leah rubbed her tummy. It wasn't yet noticeable, but she was pregnant again. Yahweh's goodness to her was overwhelming. She smiled at what she decided must be his plan. Because of her sons, she now had Jacob's attention and forgiveness. After her next child, he would become attached to her. She would name him Levi.